Hello, I'm Di Chilvers, a consultant in early childhood education, also an early education associate, and I chaired the Birth to 5 Matters group on observation, assessment and planning. So in this short film, what I'd like to do is to explain some of the key aspects that we looked at when we were thinking about observation, assessment and planning, and what we've included in the guidance. I hope this is going to really tempt you to look further into the guidance and into the other materials that are on the website, especially the resources, which are really helpful. There's a great store of information there on all sorts of things, not just observation, assessment and planning. So let's start with thinking about what's actually there on about observation, assessment and planning. So in this section, we unpick the professionally skilled process of observation, assessment and planning, and explain a lot of the language like formative assessment, summative assessment, what's an informed professional decision, all those sort of things. And we show the crucial connection between child development and how we understand children's progress and holistic development, which are all sort of interwoven throughout the guidance. There's all the sections are connected because we're basically talking about how children learn and develop and grow. So we retain the familiar cycle of observation, assessment and planning from the previous Development Matters document. That diagram was an iconic part of the previous version and a real familiar starting point for everyone on that process of observe, assess, plan, which is the statutory duty. And that statutory duty is explained in the EYFS statutory framework under 2.1. And the diagram of observe, assess, plan with those orange arrows going round and round in that process really describes that statutory duty. So that's why we wanted to keep it. So observation, assessment and planning is still a statutory requirement of the early years foundation stage. It hasn't gone away and it remains that statutory duty for babies, for the very youngest children, right the way through to the end of the foundation stage. So it's an essential and integral part of our professional practice with young children. So why do I emphasize that? Well, because effective practice really begins with the unique child. That's why the unique child is in the very centre of the diagrams, of the holistic diagrams that we've created in these pages. And you'll see holistic diagrams all the way through Birth to 5 Matters with the child at the centre. And the reason that we do that is because we start with the unique child, tuning into them and building relationships with them. And of course, one of the best ways to do that is to observe. So that's what we're doing. And just to remind people that the EYFS statutory framework does mention assessment and observation and progression quite a few times in the dialogue in the framework. So it's really worthwhile just having a dig in there to look at where that comes up across that framework, but also into the Ofsted inflection framework as well, because it crops up there a lot as well, particularly knowing about the starting points, children's starting points. Where are they when you first meet them? And where they progress to, their learning journey, if you like, and how you explain that. So it's worthwhile having a look at those documents alongside the Birth to 5 Matters guidance materials. Okay, so let's talk about observation, because that's where we start. So it's the best method of understanding a child's development, you know, what they're communicating and thinking about, what they're interested in, how they feel, what they know, and above all, what they understand. So we need to go beyond these superficial tick lists and outcomes to look much more deeply at children's levels of engagement and involvement, all those dispositions of being a learner, which are captured so well in the characteristics of effective learning. That's where the learning happens. And this iceberg metaphor is quite helpful, really, because I think often we just look at the tip of the iceberg with children, and that's happened a lot because of the ticking lists and following statements and highlighting things and so on. That we need to really get back to thinking about all that rich stuff below the surface that children are engaged and involved in, their deeper levels of thinking and learning and understanding. So we don't need to document every single observation, but there are some observations that could be captured in some way, like this one, which is just part of a lovely observation where the boys are decided to line up all the footballs ready for the penalties for the goalkeepers. And their teacher is observing them using an iPad to take photographs, just to show the learning unfolding and the story of the learning. And the conversation that the children are having is shown here between them, going backwards and forwards between the two boys. And then the teacher observes, but she also adds in a really important possibility question there about, oh no, what are you going to do now? So she stretched their thinking and their problem solving and supported it at the same time as being there as an observer and so on. So other observations and a vast amount of information is in your head because you are a continual observer. That's part of our job. We observe everything, and sometimes we don't even know we're doing it. And much of that process, that gathering of information, the formative assessment, is gathered through observation in action with the children when you're in the thick of it, a bit like this example. So we quickly assess in action, and this is what Miss Mercer's done here. She's thought, they're stuck. Right, I need to ask a possibility question. I need to just pop something over to them to see where they're going to go next. And in doing that, she's also planned in action as well. So it just happens as part of the process of working with children, being with children, participating with children and teaching children. So observation shouldn't be a time-consuming and onerous task, but it should be respectful, insightful, enjoyable, and a reflective way of building your knowledge and understanding of child development and how children learn, as well as celebrating their creativity and imagination and learning during their time with you. So what you document and how you do that really depends on how you see observation. If you only see it as a means of assessing children and nothing else, then you miss all the other amazing possibilities and opportunities for observation with children in everyday practice, but also as a crucial link between home and school and setting. So it's a pretty important part of our work. So how then do we lead that into assessment? What happens next in that process? So when we go on to assessment, what we're thinking about is we're analysing what we've seen. We're analysing our observations and deciding what they tell us about the children. And we do that in lots of different ways. We basically interpret all the things that we've gathered, whether a lot of that's in your head and information that you know and conversations you've had with parents and colleagues and conversations you've had with the children, all the things that you gathered in that holistic sort of process of children's learning and development. You gathered it together and now you've got to make sense of it. And to do that, we've put some reflective questions here in the guidance for all of the parts of observation, assessment and planning. And those questions are there to get you to think about, well, what am I seeing these children doing? What's actually going on here? And to look at their interests, to look at their characteristics of learning, to look at their what they're learning by way of the areas of learning and so on. All these things come into the pot, and then you have to analyse that. And things that help you to do that are guidance documents like Birth 5 Matters, but also these things that are in your head that I call the observation toolkit. And that's not a toolkit that you go and buy. It's a toolkit that you build in your head, that many of us have been building over years and hopefully started when we trained initially. But it includes all those tools that we know about child development, about levels of involvement and well-being, the characteristics of effective learning, schema, special educational needs, the development of speech and language. So the more we can pull on these tools that we have available to us to say, right, well, what do I think is happening here? How can I support that? The better able we are to make a professionally informed decision. So there's lots of things in the guidance to help you with this as well, but look out for the questions around the observation, assessment and planning cycle there, because they're there as prompts to help you think about those aspects. So what happens when we get to planning? So we often think of planning as creating lots of next steps for children. And that's been a bit of a sticking point for practitioners and teachers, because often we end up with so many next steps, we don't know which way to turn. And then what happens is that planning takes over, and then it's sort of like a race to get all the next steps done and to make sure that you followed them through. So, you know, that becomes quite onerous, and then, you know, we lose the sort of flexibility of the planning for child-ledness and adult-ledness and so on. So planning really has to support and extend and teach children. And it builds on those observations, and it builds on your analysis that you've made of those observations. And then you need to sort of think about, well, what can I do to extend the children's development and learning? So next steps are also about you as a practitioner and teacher. So how are you going to support the child or the children? You know, it might be through playing alongside the child, joining in as a play partner, or you might add something to the continuous provision, or you might ask possibility questions like Miss Mercer did with the boys and their footballs. But also, you want to perhaps record some of that. You don't need to record everything, and you don't need to write everything down, but there are things that do need to be noted, and you need to have a discussion about that, about what's important, and making sure that you're not duplicating things or doing excessive amounts of paperwork on planning. So a lot of people are using things like whiteboards to just jot things down as they happen during the day and in the moment, and to think about, well, how does that inform where we're going next with this? What do we need to do tomorrow? What do we need to do this afternoon to support children's learning and development? And floor books are used a lot in that way as well, where they're very collaborative planning, where, you know, children are planning with you, and not only that, they're recording, you're recording, you know, what they've done previously. So it becomes this mixture of observation, assessment and planning in the floor book. And the beauty of this is that it's very collaborative, because you're actually planning with the children and bringing them into it, and that's so important for them. Don't forget also, you're planning on your feet. So in this lovely picture here of these children playing in outside, there is an adult in the back there, a very experienced adult in the thick of it, who is all the time observing the children, and he or she is trying to help them sort out why the rope won't work, it's got tangled up. But rather than just go in there and sort it out for them, she's actually working with them, playing with them, modelling, making suggestions, perhaps asking a question and so on. And that's planning, Also, don't forget the conversations you have with each other, because those conversations about, you know, they're often incidental and happen sort of during the day and so on with the children, and things start to you know, unfold by way of planning. And I mean, all this type of work really is called, it's called responsive pedagogy. It's about how we as adults respond to what we've seen the children doing. So lots of exciting ways to do that. Only a few mentioned here. So just to finish, we also wanted to show where observation, assessment and planning fits in this bigger picture, because it doesn't just sit on the edges of what we do, something we do after we've done an event, after a day or after a week or after an activity. You know, it's woven through. So there's this real connection between observation, assessment and planning and the curriculum and what you do throughout the setting in the school. And each child will experience that curriculum in a unique way, which will be evident through your observations of them and your assessment and your planning. So it's important to see the connection. So here we are with the unique child at the centre, surrounded by the fact that we will get to know them, we'll find out what they're doing, we'll understand them, we'll know how to support them through that constant cycle of observation, assess and plan. And then surrounding that, you've got the curriculum, you know, everything that you've decided that will support those children in their learning and development, you know, the characteristics, the areas of learning, play, what you do with the enabling environment, how you respond to children's interests and funds of knowledge. These are all things that you can find out through observation, assessment and planning. So it's a two-way process here. So for example, the curriculum needs to respond to children's interests and funds of knowledge and cultural capital, but we don't know that until we've observed, got to know them and tuned into them. So there's this real sort of interaction between all of them and that outer orange circle, which is the child's context, because that shows the child's wider world and the influences on them of their parents and their family and culture and language and community. So equally, practitioners need to know about these things to truly know and understand and tune into the child. Otherwise, any observations you make of the child will have very important pieces missing. So there's more about this on a paper or in a paper that we've written about observation, assessment and planning, the bigger picture. And you can find that in the resources section of the Birth to Five Matters website. There's a link there at the bottom of the slide, but here's the website, which is a treasure trove of all sorts of things that can help you construct your curriculum, to think about children's development, to look at progress, to think about every single aspect of early years pedagogical practice. So do have a look at that. But also don't forget to look at the early education website, because that too is really helpful in supporting you and your teams to really build that confidence and understanding of observation, assessment and planning, the curriculum and many, many, many other things. So do have a look at that. So I hope this film's been helpful, and enjoy using Birth to Five Matters. It is a real treasure trove of child-centred practice. So thank you very much. Bye.